Okay, great.
Okay.
Let me. I want to tell you what I actually have considered already and need some help with. Um, okay, so I need some help. We're not starting the presentation yet. This is the preview.
Okay.
I want to explain some things.
You have a fan.
Hi, Sanka. Sanka.
Oh, battery!
Just came back from the gym this morning.
One thing that I'm considering is whether or not to actually use the job title from this particular case in this manuscript, rather than use this pedagogical technologist term that I've been using all along. Since I'm only writing about one school and one role in this school, I was like, oh, well, should I just use this educational technology coach term?
Maybe you could, when you start, you need to frame your study, and you can say that this is, you've been doing a study on pedagogical technologies, and this is one of the cases in your study. And then you can say, in this school, and you can say, different schools call these pedagogical technologies by different titles. And you could, so in a way you can, in the kind of introduction, you can give a little bit more of the complexity. So especially when you're saying, this is, because you say you're taking an ecological perspective.
Yeah.
And what you mean by ecological is kind of like evolving and emerging. So one thing that is, one kind of ecological perspective is that you have new. That's your perspective. You have a new species, which is in terms of the role. Before there was never something like this, and it's actually, and you could say, because people may not have your perspective of what PTs are, and so you can say, with the introduction of IT in schools, then there were already new roles being established. Of course, those roles may not be new staff, but it used to be that you have new roles like looking after technology. So it's like IT so often called IT coordinator or whatever. But then slowly you have actually schools recognizing it's not just a matter of technology, but it's in fact in helping teachers to integrate the technology in pedagogically sound ways to support the learning.
Yes.
And so you could then frame your PT, and then within that perspective, you can then say, but then although generally not generally, some schools now have roles which have this pedagogical
technologist
orientation.
Yes.
You include the pedagogical orientation within the technology in school kind of support role. But then exactly how they are called, named formally, or the kind of job specification with respect to the role is not, it's actually, it could vary quite differently. So then you can say, well, so this particular study is for this particular PT. On a particular school, and you in fact talk about more than one PT, but then you say you focus on this PT. But it's actually within the context. The bigger context of the school.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so that's one thing. My research question is not a very good research question. And so this, I need help with that. I proposed 2 new research questions in the presentation, and I do want to simplify what exactly I'm looking at in this particular manuscript. I'm looking at changing organizational structures in this manuscript. Not only that, but afterwards, after examining what these changes are, in terms of mechanisms and interaction foci, I want to say, okay, well, now that we have these changing structures, we have this role, and what do these changing structures perhaps foretell about the viability of this role in the school? And I'll get to that in a moment. That's another thing I need some feedback on. Okay, so this was a way that ultimately I was conceptualizing findings. And it's not very clear. I propose a different way to visualize what I'm discovering in the formal presentation. And I reverse things a bit. Yeah, I've been struggling a lot with visual presentation. And yeah, I appreciate suggestions on how I can actually like visualize the interconnectedness of the structures, the mechanisms, and the interaction foci. Okay, another thing I need feedback on is the scope of what I'm actually presenting in the manuscript. What I wanted to do was present the kinds of changes that were going on before and at the point of the start of this new role. So we don't actually have this new role yet. This person has not gone from being a computer teacher to being this educational technology coach. But during this transition, the year before and then up to this the start of the academic year, the 2012-2013 academic year, the school undergoes many structural changes. And then it produces new mechanisms and interaction foci. And that was the extent of what I wanted to present in the mechanism, not what actually happens afterwards during the school year and how this role in this school starts to use these interaction foci between mechanisms and also to create new mechanisms. So I had a different kind of original scope, but maybe I should actually talk about, okay, so we have these structural changes, and then the educational technology coach starts. And then he starts into this kind of environment. Ultimately, in my case, I'm writing about that. So in the first part of my case, right, I'm actually sharing what I'm going to share with you today. These are the changes before, and then during the school year, this is what happens, and I'm not sharing that in this presentation. And then ultimately, this is what it looks like afterwards. I need a lot of help with this thing because it's this interaction focus of technology integration is associated with a lot of different structures in the school. I'll mention it in my findings, but this school starts to promote technology integration from the 2012-2013 school year. And they do it in several ways. They put it in their student learning strategic plan. They also put it in teacher contracts. So from the 2012 to 2013 school year, any new teacher and teachers who are subsequently resigning must agree to this non-negotiable item of technology integration. Now, as I will mention in my presentation, there's a problem with that because no one knows what technology integration actually means. So that actually becomes one of the interaction foci for this educational technology coach during the year, to actually define what this means so that ultimately it can impact the performance appraisal structure. So what does this and other non-negotiable items ultimately touch on? I will touch on this too in my findings, that one of the great structural changes in professional development was the creation, at least in paper, of professional learning communities. And again, this is an emerging area of research, and it's a trendy thing in practice as well. And I see this in this particular school as a mechanism. It's like a meeting. They just call it PLC. It's emphasized extensively in a lot of the strategic documents of this school. And this is the first year that we have this mechanism. Okay. So I need a lot of help just kind of working those things out. And let me start. Okay. So I'm presenting an emerging educational technologist role called the educational technology coach in changing organizational structures. And I'm going to provide background on how I arrived at this research. Educational technologist roles have emerged as a way to support increasing educational technology use in schools. And some roles are widespread, including roles usually called ICT coordinator, IT coordinator. However, as schools increasingly use technology, possibly we can have emergent educational technology roles. And the literature suggests that these roles could be more specialized. For instance, this person, April, when he was doing a survey of educational technology professionals in international schools, he created 15 discrete categories for survey respondents, and it seemed there were many different types of specialized roles for educational technology professionals in that context. On the other hand, educational technology roles can also perhaps be more paraprofessional and be more encompassing, such as Bird's group of instructional designers in the Australian tertiary context. So we have the possibility of emergent educational technology roles. However, they could be undervalued, not least because they could be part-time roles, not least because there may not be enough people to actually fill these roles. In addition, they may be located in obscure geography or perhaps obscure organizational types. For instance, Friesen says that ICT workers in general are under research, but especially ICT workers in private international schools. Okay, so to understand an emerging educational technologist role, we also have to take a look at the school. How can we conceptualize the school? Because ultimately, how we understand the school is how we understand this role, whether, for instance, it is hyper-specialized or it is a paraprofessional role. So the way I lay out a school conceptually is there are these broad conceptual categories, such as curriculum and professional development and performance appraisal. And these are what I call organizational structures. They're the broadest frame for interactions or practice amongst staff. They're the broadest conceptual categories. Now, within these broad conceptual categories, what we actually have doing. All right, so the actual doing, the practices or the behavior or the processes by specific actors, I call these mechanisms. And they can be physical and they lead to outcomes, possibly outcomes. And I lean heavily on Shearer and Spillane's understanding of organizational routines. I find these synonymous. Then, so if this is a mechanism right now, then we have to have an interaction focus. What is the point of our meeting? These actors meeting. And that's what I call the interaction focus. It's the specific practical topic. Right now we are discussing my research. And we have different roles as well. So the actors, the human actors may have different roles, and we can recognize them, their job titles and descriptions, and their affiliation with these. Okay, so I'm reimagining my conceptual framework now. And I also understand schools in terms of complexity theory, and they are complex adaptive systems. These, I'm showing you multiple levels, and they're related. They're related and they feed back with each other. So structures are connected. And what happens in one structure can impact another structure. What happens in one mechanism can feed back to other mechanisms. Now, how do I actually visualize that? So, going back to the way I presented the definitions, we have organizational structures, these are the broadest conceptual categories, and then we have the practices and the processes, and they're attended by actors, and then here we have the interaction foci. And I want to show how there are levels and how they can be interconnected. And later on, I will try to partition these into discrete organizational structures. Okay, let's see. Okay, so what am I trying to examine with these emerging educational technology roles in this particular context with this particular scope for this presentation? How are a school's organizational structures changing with the emergence of the educational technologist role? So, how are these changing with this? This is becoming, emerging. So what is it about these that are changing? Not only this, but since these encompass these, what is changing about these as well? So I'm trying to demonstrate multi-level change. And how are these changes associated with the emerging of an educational technologist role? That's not the best question. So for this presentation, I'm going to try to show you how these are changing. The structures are changing, and how these multiple levels are changing, how they're interrelated. Okay, so why did I choose this school? And I think this goes into the introduction. I was doing a broader study on pedagogical technologists in private international schools in Hong Kong. And I was finding these pedagogical technologists at different stages of that role in their schools. And then I stumbled upon some pedagogical technologists in private international schools in Singapore. I was like, okay, well, we could add them to the study, not least because this particular person, I was catching him in his first year as a pedagogical technologist, and also in the school's first year of having a pedagogical technologist. So about this school, it is the largest single campus private international school in the world. They, in the 2011-2012 academic year, they had a new superintendent. And then, and this goes into findings, there was many structural changes from the 2012-2013 academic year. One structural change was the creation of something called the EdTech team. And the EdTech team is for the entire school. And there are several school sections. So there are several school sections on this single campus private international school, and each school section receives a EdTech team. And I'm focusing on the primary sections EdTech team. And each EdTech team comprises educational technology coaches, and then another new role, educational technology coordinators. And the coordinators have coach responsibility, but also some administrative and formal leadership responsibility. So I'm focusing on one educational technology coach in the primary section in this school. And his name is Steve. And his educational technology coordinator is Michael. And as I was doing a broader study, and as these emerging educational technologists belong to the same community of practice, I realized that these other educational technologists also know Steve and could comment on what he was doing in his school. And he could comment on what they're doing because they talk to each other frequently.
So you mean that actually Michael is in the same school?
Yes. So
but then Sam and Susan are not.
Yes, they belong to a different private international school in Singapore.
And why do you have to bring it into this paper?
Steve talks a lot about what these people are doing, and they talk a lot about what he's doing. And I use this as a way to make what he says more reliable. So it's like, okay, well, he says something, but they're also saying, oh yeah, it actually exists. In the same way, I use Steve's comments in writing my case about Sam to bolster the credibility of what Sam is saying. Okay, so for the data that I use in this presentation, I use data from these interviews, and also I went to Singapore once and spent a day with Steve. In addition, and these are very important, they're also very telling, the school website has many documents detailing their structural changes. It is comprehensive. I've not seen such a well-documented school. In addition, now just going to Steve himself, his practices are very well documented on his YouTube channel, on his Twitter feed, on his Google Documents, on a blog that he maintains, not only for his school audience, but for wider public consumption. For triangulation purposes, to make what I see here more reliable, I also have visited the websites of colleagues, Steve's colleagues, and also external mechanism websites. Okay, so during these interviews with Steve, I asked questions about what I problematize different structures. And these are examples of some questions. These are not all the questions I asked, but originally I categorized them as such. I did these semi-structured interview questions through Skype. Okay. And as they're answering, as I'm going through their answers, Steve's answers to these questions, as I'm looking through these documents to help validate what Steve is answering in his questions, I'm also categorizing his answers according to structures. I'm identifying structures in his answer, and then for my definition, mechanisms, and I'm identifying roles, and I'm identifying interaction foci. And now I'm presenting changes that are mentioned several times in my data. So what I problematize as curriculum changes? And I've mentioned that technology integration has become a curriculum focus. It is mentioned in several times by Steve and the educational technology coordinator. It's also mentioned specifically on some documents on the website, and it's in the teacher contracts. Another change is the school went from a 5-day cycle, so they have a timetable, the duration, a 5-day duration timetable, to a 12-day timetable. And what happens is the mechanisms start changing too. So as we have computer teachers become educational technology coaches and coordinators, their teaching load decreases at the same time. They go from teaching several computer lessons a day to at most one a day, which means they actually have a lot of discretionary time all day. Something that the EdTech coach and coordinator mentioned was that there were, in spite of these changes, in terms of certain content areas, there were no changes. And some content areas continue to follow, like maths and literacy, very rigid and inflexible programs. So we go to this idea of a professional development structure. And this is the first year of the 2012-2013 academic year that this school has released professional learning communities. And they emphasize it in several documents. They create several documents for it. In practice, for the primary EdTech team, for Steve, it means a weekly meeting. So they have a weekly meeting. Oh, and also it's also a non-negotiable item in contracts as well. So professional learning communities are for the EdTech team are separated by school section. So the primary EdTech team becomes a community, or they attend this mechanism. All right. Oh, and one other big change, and perhaps is the most obvious one, is the EdTech structure, EdTech team structure itself is equivalent to the professional development structure. So in the professional learning handbook, the school's professional learning handbook, but also in the school's professional development opportunities document, they list EdTech coaches and mentors as professional development resources. So in this professional learning handbook, they explain that the EdTech team is a professional learning structure. Performance appraisal. I forgot to add this, but this is the first year that the school is using SMART goals. Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound goals. And each professional learning community has SMART goals. So that becomes an interaction focus. So through this change of performance appraisal, you have a new interaction focus, SMART goals. And it's an interaction focus for the PLC mechanism. So we're having a meeting, we have to talk about our SMART goal. And so the EdTech team, the primary EdTech team's SMART goal becomes introducing blogging into the curriculum. However, there are no changes to the EdTech coaches and coordinators' performance appraisal. So in spite of these SMART goals, the mechanisms themselves don't change. They undergo lesson observations and meetings with the principal. I'm over time. I will continue anyway.
How much longer will you continue? Now, you have to be very careful. Okay, so you need to think about how you need to have a clear focus for what you want to. I mean, first of all, you need to be very clear, but you need to do the best you can
Yes.
to present.
Yes.
Okay, so we are the audience.
Mm.
So we are trying to understand.
Yes.
So you have to do your best in the presentation first, as we normally would. So
Yes.
I would suggest that you try to. Do you think you can finish within 10 minutes?
Yeah. Let's do it. So, how would I describe this? Okay. As I was mentioning about this technology integration, interaction focus in curriculum, the reason why I don't list it here is that no one in the school knows what it means yet. So it becomes an interaction focus for the EdTech team. What the EdTech team does during the 2012 and 2013 school year in their weekly meeting, so all the EdTech teams meet once a week, is they are trying to make clear what technology integration means for teachers and staff in the school. So ultimately, it becomes an interaction focus for performance appraisal. At the moment, amongst other reasons, Steve says that teachers are not integrating technology because they have no idea what it means. It is not clear to them. Okay, finally, we have changes to physical structure, the infrastructure. And this is the first year that the school is moving from Windows to Macs. iMacs in computer labs, and iPads in computer labs, and then iPads in all the classrooms, one-to-one. Excuse me. So these themselves become interaction foci because there are many aspects of introducing iPads to all of these mechanisms. For instance, in a computer, in any kind of lesson in the primary school. Who's responsible for charging them, plugging them, updating software? How do you store them? These are even small things. What are the appropriate use policies? In addition, the school begins introducing Google Apps into classrooms. So staff are encouraged strongly to use Google Apps, and that leads to new mechanisms during the school year. So let's go back to this question. So what I wanted to show was how are a school's organizational structures changing with the emergence of the educational technologist role. And this is the old framework. And I try to show that within these structures, we have the changes to existing mechanisms and the creation of new mechanisms. And these mechanisms may belong to more than one structure. They may be associated with more than one structure. In addition, with these changes to these structures, we have the introduction of new interaction foci. And these interaction foci can belong to more than one structure in the same way that a mechanism can belong to more than one structure. These are interaction foci for these mechanisms. Hello. Okay. And maybe I'll just point out one or two final things. So we have an idea at the start of the school year what Steve is going to be doing. In general, he's going to be working on defining technology integration through his ed tech team meetings. He's going to be trying to introduce blogging into other lessons and his computer lessons, and also discussing in his professional learning communities, and also perhaps making use of his discretionary time. And that's something important too, the self-organization of discretionary time, because that's actually most of his day. We also see that Steve's going to be doing the same thing with Macs and iPads and Google Apps in his lessons and other people's lessons. And there's a possibility, again, of emergence of other kinds of mechanisms during the school year. I think that's it. So I'm showing you this kind of garden into which Steve is emerging. Well, let me add one final thing too. This is not a very cohesive alignment of structures and interaction foci and mechanisms. There's actually a lot of friction and non-linearity in all of these changes. As I mentioned earlier, Steve is not a teacher anymore. He's an educational technology coach. But educational technology coaches and coordinators are appraised as if they were teachers. The appraisal mechanisms have not changed yet. So we see that there's these opposing properties. In the same way, Steve has a SMART goal, blogging, and he needs to introduce it into other people's lessons. But if other lessons are so rigid, the content areas are so rigid, then it will be hard for him to actually make contact with the teachers to talk about the curriculum points. At the same time, we see that teachers are supposed to integrate technology, becoming an interaction focus, but people actually don't know what technology integration entails. So before we know what technology integration entails, Steve and his EdTech team actually have to define it in their EdTech team meeting. I am finished.
So then we should have Q&A, right? So what should the Q&A? So 10 minutes Q&A.
20 minutes. Yes, thank you.
Favorite for your articles and presentation and essay narrative. It's very interesting and very enjoyable. I read several times in the lunchtime. Yeah.
Um,
But one interesting thing you point out, on second page and last page, you pointed several times. Is the code evolve, the roles of the
Yes.
coach and the structures code evolve.
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned several times.
Yes.
But it is not very clear how it could evolve. For example, the role is from teachers to advocate and then to maybe the co-learners as a team,
Yes.
professional learning community.
Yes.
So how the structure and the role could evolve.
Yes.
I cannot see the view, but perhaps you can make use of a graphics, presentation
Yes.
to make it clear.
Yes.
The second thing is that you also mentioned one very interesting point that structure itself is very dynamic. There are several items, for example, curriculum, professional development, and so on, and the infrastructure.
Yes.
They are interrelated.
Yes.
Okay? If you change one thing but without any change of another,
Yes.
it may not be very good. Okay, you make use of the math curriculum, for example. If we have got the aim, curriculum goal,
Yes.
the curriculum content isn't changed.
Yes.
It is the missing link, right?
Yes.
So that's good. So the dynamic itself, one structural items with another structural item.
Yes.
Perhaps if you give more insight about that.
Yes.
Really wonderful.
Thank you. I will address your 2 points. One, I'm actually not addressing the coevolution in this presentation. That was something that I was trying to, that's why I need feedback on. The scope. See, I'm actually talking about what happens before we even have an educational technology coach. So the education technology coach is one of many changes that happen at the same time in this school. And that's what I'm trying to describe. Now, in my case that I'm writing, and what I'm writing right now, I actually start to say, in the second part of my case writing, I start to actually narrate. So, what actually happens now with Steve and these interaction foci and these mechanisms? And many things do happen. For instance, because the school has begun emphasizing Google Apps, he and several other colleagues start developing a portfolio of their use of Google Apps to become ultimately Google certified teachers, to attend an external mechanism called the Google Teacher Academy. We see also through Google Apps that the school starts hosting annual Google Apps conferences. They start during the 2012-2013 year, and they've been doing it since. And they start sending their staff members to external Google Apps conferences in the region. We see that from this discretionary time, the ed tech team starts actually creating new formal mechanisms. They start creating additional meetings. They call one Donut Wednesdays. And it happens that these guys were just getting donuts on Wednesdays because they serve donuts in the cafeteria on Wednesdays. And the ed tech team's like, well, let's just have an additional meeting. And it's not their official professional learning community mechanism, but then they start mentioning to other people in the ed tech team across the schools. So then they start having this voluntary but regular mechanism where in addition to this meeting, they create an additional meeting where they discuss things like Macs and iPads and other interaction foci that members of the EdTech team are doing in their schools. So I actually, when I went my site visit, I saw one of their Donut Wednesdays that came through during the school year. So I'm showing you the coevolution in part 2 of the case, but I haven't shown it to you here in this actual presentation. Maybe it's worth my actually showing that in this manuscript. Yes. But then what I'm struggling with is how to actually visualize it. Again, And some flow charts would be great.
Yeah, I try to draw something.
I think probably before we talk about how you can improve,
Yes.
why don't we get people to ask you questions? Because it's in understanding what we don't understand,
Yes.
right? That is important.
Yes.
So, yes, you want-
You mentioned in the beginning, you don't have to linear and nonlinearity and the density and simplicity. Could you show me how this works? But I couldn't see the same. Show me how is this interaction or this against happening. What is the density? What do you mean by simplicity? What is this? What is the linear? What do you mean?
Sure. Linear nonlinearity. So in complex adaptive systems, there's a sense of cohesiveness. But when you look inside at different levels, because there are different levels within a system, you also see a lot of tension. So
What is the linearity in your case?
I'm going to get to that in a moment. I want to contextualize this. For example, if you see stock prices, for instance, if you track one particular stock, it seems like it's going up, right? It's like Apple stock. It just keeps going up. But you also see on a day-to-day basis and an hour-to-hour basis, great fluctuation as well. It's not actually smooth. In the same way, if you look at a traffic jam, you can see that it seems like everything's at a standstill. But if you look closely, there are different movements or lack of movements between individual cars and groups of cars in different areas. So what I'm trying to show is that while on the surface, it seems, well, we just have an ed tech team and we have this educational technology coach, and they're going to be doing these kinds of things. I'm showing you the nonlinearity because it's actually not very easy to do all these kinds of things. Because there are several changes going at the same time, but they're not necessarily cohesive changes. That's the nonlinearity. So again, for instance, how can you introduce blogging when you don't have any lessons? And there are no mechanisms for you to actually get into someone else's classroom. How can we be appraised for technology integration when we don't actually know what it is? So these are the kinds of tensions that I'm trying to point out with all of these changes. They're not all clean and nice cuts. It's just a bunch of messy cuts.
Like that explanation.
Yes. Oh, another one. I mean, just as I'm thinking off the top of my head, as I was mentioning earlier. So you have iPads now. What exactly do you do with them in the classroom? And how do you actually know what to do with them in the classroom? So while it may seem that ultimately we are introducing iPads into the classroom and you can put it on brochures, what is the actual practice and how do they develop? At what level are they developing? So we actually see later on as I continue to write this case that Steve starts developing the policies for iPads for use in the primary section. And I don't know if they get scaled up to the other school sections.
How do you call it these dimensions, aspects? How do you call it this organization? How do you call it this?
I wanted to use broad conceptual categories.
Categories.
Yes. broad conceptual categories that are called structures.
So each segment is a structure. So
Um,
you have these segments. You have the rings and you have the segments, right?
so in this original visual, I wanted to show organizational structures and mechanisms, interaction foci. And I wanted to see if I could partition these structures. What I felt would be a better picture was doing it the other way and seeing how organizational structures are the all-encompassing conceptual categories, and then within that we have these processes and practices that belong to these, and we have the roles that attend to these, and then we have the interaction foci.
Because also the like the graphic in the categories too small actually. So good. But I like it, the shape, but it was so tiny for me. However, I was struggling even to understand the graphic.
Yes.
So I would like to say, how do you call the organization, the structures, mechanisms, and the interaction process? How do you call it these three? I don't know,
The sum of them?
no, just because in the beginning I thought that the physical infrastructure and the appraisal
Yes.
was part of the, so why this is to the iPad, I couldn't understand it. It was like an element, and then I realized, oh no, this is kind of title. But I didn't know. Then later I realized, oh, it's a title. So to me, it looks like in the beginning it was a table with two entrances.
Yes, yes.
That's what I want to say. What do you call these five divisions, and what is the precise name?
Pieces of cake.
Yeah.
How do you call it? So what's each piece of cake?
Mm,
Yeah,
yes.
or-
Yes.
Yeah, what is categories, dimensions, I don't know. And what do you call these organization structures, mechanisms, and interaction forcing these three groups? Because you're putting five through three. You're combining five to three, but I don't know what they mean because you mention every time the structures, mechanisms,
Yes, yes,
interaction, oversight, every time. So I also like you. It's so difficult to read. For me, it was so difficult to read, very easy,
Yes,
because you were repeating this long sentences
yes, agreed.
each time. It would
Yes.
be nice once just in a paragraph, and you're repeating anything. I said, "Why?" So it maybe do not need to define a more precise word aspects, categories, dimensions. What do you call it this? And how
Okay.
can you
Let me use
differentiate
those words down.
because it was very confusing to me.
Yes. So you want a clear hierarchy, aspects.
Or I mean, each piece of cake. I mean, does it mean anything? So you
Yes.
have several pieces of cake on your pie.
Yes.
But the document always makes it like that. Because people they say, oh, I want to see what is this, what is this, by
Yes, yes.
myself. Because it's too messy.
Yes, yes, it is necessary.
So you need to define these five elements. What do you call it? Dimensions, aspects, characteristics. What do you call it? And also the three other ones because those are also it's like very fundamental, like the organizational structures, mechanisms, and interaction. So how do you call these three ones? It's a group of three, and the other is a group of curriculum, development, education team, or the learning advisor, and the physical one. You need to find the name or something of it all. What are the commonalities of these five divisions? What is the commonality of these three other ones? Organization, structures, mechanisms, and interaction. Still
Okay.
So can you have also some questions? Yes?
Yeah, I have a question about the methodology. Could you provide more details about how the interview is designed to asking about organization structures and mechanisms? So, what aspects or factors should be considered in asking about these terms? Because this term is quite abstract to the individual.
Yes, yes, I agree.
So, how to design the
Well, it may not be just interview. So your question is more like how do you design your well, how do you design your research
Yes.
to get to the structure and the mechanism?
Yes. Well, what I'm trying to do in coding these things is whatever their answer. So they actually say something, and they respond. Hello. They respond to something about professional development by naming something and talking about something. So I associate that with professional development. In the same way, when I go through these documents, there are many, many documents here about professional development and curriculum. And the kinds of things that they name here, I associate with the larger conceptual categories because they have already associated them with the larger conceptual categories. And then when I'm reviewing literature, I want to be sure, or to make more reliable, what I'm finding in this school and finding in these interviews. That, oh, these kinds of mechanisms, for instance, are a part of this kind of structure. So, for instance, with regard to professional learning communities, they are associated with professional development structure in the literature. And okay, now let's do something a little more more wild. So what about other structures then, including the EdTech team? Okay, so that exists, and I can only find it in this school and in these people's responses. I want to be open to that too, that maybe there are some other larger conceptual categories that I'm not touching on, including, for example, hiring mechanisms. For instance. That's something that I've been struggling with. It's like, what exactly is, when they're talking about these non-negotiable line items, when they're talking about non-negotiable line items in contracts, like technology integration, a commitment to technology integration, and a commitment to membership in PLCs in the school, what exactly is that? That is difficult. So I need to review more literature. What do contracts fall under?
To go back to the interview.
Yes.
Say you ask which the first for the first question, which aspect of what would you want to conclude about about the structure or mechanism from this
I don't think I want to conclude anything. The person is going to respond. I don't understand what you mean by conclude. Do I have an expectation of what they want to say, or what I want to hear? No, I don't think I did.
I think probably there's something that you need to consider is that, I mean, okay, so you have a lot of data, it's very rich, but there is no overall description of your design
Yes.
methodology or a rationale for how you go about it. So,
Yes.
so and even I think the analysis, it reads like, you know, it reads like it's very opportunistic. So you just go around and you see and you, okay, so say for example, we talk about, okay, there's so much documentation, but so it seems like, okay, so that's how you bump in. So it's like you're bumping into all these things. But if someone is really designing, so did you have an intentional design? Did you have an intentional methodology?
Yes.
So how would so what would be the kind of documents that you think would be relevant to structures? So what counts as structures, right? So how do you look for them? What kinds of mechanisms? Where would you look for them? Okay, so you might be looking for them. So you might have multiple sources to look for them, but then each kind of source will probably be giving you different aspects of those. So you need, well, maybe, well, probably there is an element of learning through doing. So there is
Yes,
also
there is.
some kind of opportunism
Yes.
there. But when you write it up, you have to present it in a more, well, I mean, and it's
yes.
not just rationalizing, but you probably have, or you probably had, you know, some kind of a scheme when you were doing this. I mean, okay, there might be some elements of luck, but it cannot be all luck. Okay, somebody who has no concept about what it is will not be able to bump into this. It's just like, you know, any odd robot or any odd dog bump, you know, just striking at the keyboard will not come up with a poem or whatever. So it's the same thing. There must be something which was guiding.
Yes.
And so what were the guiding, you know, what were the guiding principles or methodology or whatever that led you to do it? Okay,
Yes.
right. So any questions you have?
Let's say this title and research, and say something about what is this whole doing. But when I read the paper and research, we focus on what is happening.
Yes. I think that goes back to Patrick's question too. I'm in this presentation telling you what the role will be doing. So I'm telling you what's happening, and as a result of what's happening, what he will be doing. Yes, I agree. That would be good. Yes, to actually say, okay, now that we have these things are going to be happening. He's doing
But
these things.
what should be? I mean, what would be the most important question that David needs to think about
Yes.
in revising this paper? What do you think are the most important? Is the most important question?
That's a good question.
You have already written your question on the first page in the introduction, the middle part, the long sentence that you want to find out what is the changing network, the technology world. Of course, you're going to change, right?
Yeah.
Right? Perhaps um, if you stick to the semicircle thing, perhaps looking at the collective term of the structure, mechanism, interaction force.
Yes. I call that organizational capacity.
Yeah.
You can think about that. But I have one question for you.
Great.
You have a question? Then you ask.
Now I remain in the table, and I think now I understand a little better here because it was very confusing. Could you maybe show how was the organization structure before arriving before arriving the role because you changing later. So you show the previous one and the later one, and they will just the change.
Yes,
in
agreed.
two different graphics. So we can say, oh, this is changing, okay, and this is changing, not just in one, two. One, how was previously
Yes,
the role and how it's changing this role. The
yes.
previous and
I can do that right now by pointing. How do I actually visualize that?
two graphics, previous, later.
Okay.
Or
So,
Can I ask my question?
yes, thanks, Nancy.
My question is, what is the key message that you want people either listening to you in the presentation or
Yes.
reading your paper get? What's the most important message? Or, in other words, I mean, of course you want to, so you want people to think that you've really contributed something, right? Right?
Yes.
I mean, why do you write a paper if you're not contributing something, right? So what do you want people to associate with you as your contribution?
Yes.
So
These
what's the
emerging educational technology roles cannot be considered by them emerge in a complex environment. They cannot be considered by themselves to be doing things unless we consider what is happening, what is doing around them.
Can you say that in a more simple language? Say, if you don't have any, you can't use any jargon, okay?
Yes.
Can you say it in very simple terms?
Yes.
So what is the main finding from your research that you want to present here?
Mm.
Okay, you might have many findings that you want to share, but I think if you can convince people of one thing, okay,
Yes.
if there's only one thing, then what is the thing from here?
Mm. This educational technology role, Steve, will not be doing things on his own in the school. There are many things doing alongside with him. So as he is changing things, it seems like he's changing things. Well, these are ongoing changes in the school, part of a wider set of ongoing changes in the school.
Okay, so you say that the main finding is that he has to be, I mean, the only way he can really make an impact is not by himself, but but with other changes.
Yes.
Okay, so that's that's one point. But why do you? I mean, but how does that relate to all these structures, mechanisms, and roles then? Okay, so you might say, can I just say, okay, is it really surprising? Okay, I'm a teacher, or I do anything. Say I can, whatever I do, I can't do by myself, right? So one professor cannot do everything, right? So
Yes.
so a university cannot just operate by having a professor.
Yes.
They need to have faculties, and faculties have blah 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 and so on.
Yes.
So that doesn't seem to me to be very. So why do you say there is a big contribution?
These provide practical information as well about the kinds of mechanisms and interaction foci.
No,
There
don't go into practical.
Okay.
What is your theoretical contribution?
Mm.
Well, Patrick, you've been reading the same kind of literature,
Yeah.
right?
They-
You
they-
might
they're
you
doing the
might go
same
into
thing.
this. Yep.
You
So
asked me the same question.
yes, okay.
Yeah.
So how would you? So
Mhm.
well, you read the paper several times,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
enjoyed it.
Mhm.
So if this is what you have done, then how would you answer this question? Or what's your interpretation of this?
Is the interdependence and the dynamic nature of the structure itself and with the outcome in the process of change. Should I elaborate? Or is it enough?
Yeah, no, please elaborate.
Okay, because when we are talking about structures, there are several structural items. Of course, as you mentioned, one person or one role may not be sufficient. It needs a niche, you niche the environment and to have a synergy. But of course, in terms of the structure, they are all interrelated. Of course, here you have got different segments. Okay, of course, they are not discrete. They are interrelated. Okay, a place or link with the curriculum, link with the professional development. Okay, it's a dynamic nature. So it gives the insights that it's go back to the ecological perspective that that item should be linked instead of just list out all the factors or items that we focus on, and we have to look at the dynamics, how they interact or interrelate to build up to achieve the ultimate goal. That's my conceptual idea about that. And of course, in due course, the role in the interaction are dynamic and is in evolving, helping the emergence and evolution of practice. So you also mentioned in the abstract that is self-organization, very grand term. I guess it's the ultimate goal that is all these dynamic and interdependence, and then make it.
They will sort themselves out, like his discretionary time. What these kinds of changes are going to influence the viability of this role in this school, ultimately. Because there are many, just taking a step back from this case, I have other cases where there were far fewer structural changes. In fact, no structural changes at all, just a role emerged. And then it goes doing, and then it becomes extinct. If I must contribute, well, this is starting to demonstrate that for the viability of a single role, well, it is interrelated. Because it is interrelated to other things that I'm naming here, and these things, like the role, are dynamic, well, whether or not this role can be sustained, an emerging role can be sustained, depends a lot on this kind of environment, on the other kinds of wider changes.
Now, I think maybe we can go back to what was discussed earlier. Patrick was asking about the co-evolution.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe you can pull a chair so that you can sit on time. If you wish.
What?
At the back. Here.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the one closer. Oh, well, depending on where you want to sit.
Thanks. Okay. Good. Oh yeah, got some energy. Got some energy.
Right. Okay. I think actually someone was wanting to be in your seminar, and then I forgot to tell her that it's changed the time. So
Really?
no, you don't do it. You do it like this. Or we can.
Yeah. So that's fine. an integration is the mechanism. Yeah.
You started by saying that um, just basically what you're saying is just creating a role, just calling someone a PT or an EdTech coach doesn't make things happen. Okay, things don't happen because you say, okay, you be the PT or you be the coach, right?
Yes.
And then, so of course, this person has to do something, but what does it mean by doing something, right? So your point is, so I mean, we talk about so much about the structure mechanisms and the profile and so on. But well, first of all, I think what is a structure, what is a mechanism? In terms of changing other people's practices, you need, so the coach has to interact, right? So you have to interact with others. So how do you interact? So you need to have mechanism. Now, of course, the mechanisms could be formal, and it could also be informal, right?
Yes.
And so, and if the interactions are, and so you have to explain what are formal. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to tell you. Okay, so we are towards the sort of last part of the yeah, but anyway, it's good for the discussion. So we were, did I send you the paper? No, 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 probably not, because I forgot. Can I send your paper
Yeah,
to
of course,
them?
yeah,
Because we are also working on similar, yeah. Okay, I'll send you the paper and then you can read the paper later. So basically we were trying to, David has been doing an in-depth sort of case study on one EdTech coach or a pedagogical technologist. And he's been actually describing a lot of the structures, the organizational structures, okay? Like, say, timetabling, going from a 5-day cycle to a 12-day cycle, okay? Or say he was talking about professional development structures, how the school organized and so on. So he's talking about the structures and he's talking about some of the mechanisms. The mechanism could be having these professional learning communities. Basically, they were actually groups of meetings, right?
Yes.
So groupings of people. So the school said, okay, we need to have PLCs, right? And in fact, I mean, what is quite interesting in the case, in this particular case, is that because, David was saying that, well, it's not, you can't just put someone in. Yes, it's not just putting someone into a particular role. But in this particular case, the school actually plays, I mean, this is a strategic move
Yes.
by the school. It's not just, okay, well, we have some money left, so I'll appoint you to be the PT, right? So the school actually has a very clear strategic plan for the year.
Yes.
And so there are some policy, I mean, so at the policy level, there are quite clear directives.
Yes.
And then the school has particular structures in place.
Yes.
And then those are the changes. So in fact, you were detailing the changes already. Okay? So, but of course, what are the unchanged things? You were talking about this change, this did not change, and I think it becomes a little bit confusing when I was sitting there. Okay, so it's easy to say, okay, what changed? Okay, so Patrick moved. I know he moved, but then if they, so what doesn't change? There are too many things that doesn't change.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So in a way, what is the message? And of course, in this case, you want to. I mean, I think maybe what you would like to focus on is in fact this issue of co-evolution.
Yes.
Now you have not been able to demonstrate the co-evolution.
Yes. Not here. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And rather than describing all the things, okay, this is very easy for us. So when we write a paper, okay, I want to tell everything. This is all that I've done. I'm going to tell you everything that I do. But that's not the point, right?
Yes.
So what is your message? It's not in describing everything.
Yes.
But it's in selecting. And then what's the message? So I think what might be quite interesting, because say if you were quoting say the work of Coburn or Sperling or whatever, I mean they were talking about structures.
Yes.
But they were not able to, I don't think they were able to compare the differences in terms of different structures. They have not been able, I haven't read anything that have been able to demonstrate changing structures and the co-evolutionary aspects of it.
Okay.
And also, so there have been literature that talk about how different structures might facilitate different mechanism interactions,
Yes.
and also these different interactions may bring about different kinds of changes or outcomes in practice, right?
Yes.
Practice and sometimes also the belief, right? So and also sometimes the skills and so on. But I think what you were struggling to try to convince us or to show us is that, in fact, even though this particular school has put in place so many different, and so if you want now, and in this case, you're actually talking about an innovation. The focus is not in putting technology into the classroom, right? If you're just putting technology into the classroom, then you can actually very systematically do it, right? You can very systematically do it. So you see that, okay, I want one-to-one computing, I need to buy so many computers, I want so much bandwidth, and so on and so forth. You can do it systematically. But in this case, it is not just changing, a well-defined part of it because you want to change practice,
Yes.
right? And changing practice means actually eventually you are, we're talking about transformation, and the transformation includes the organization itself.
Yes.
When we say changing the organization, it means changing the roles for people and the interrelationship, including the contract terms,
Yes.
right? So in a way, so you might decide later on whether you want to talk about all of those, but you might actually talk about, some of those, we might have an overview of what were the changes that the school started with, okay?
Yes.
But then, once you start with something, and you might actually want to just focus on, don't focus on the Google app or the Mac or iPad or whatever. Maybe you just focus on the performance appraisal, the SMART goals. Okay? So, and then of course, now that's actually a very smart thing to do in putting in the performance appraisal, because you say, okay, everybody needs to do it. But what does it mean by doing it? So
Yes.
everybody needs to understand. So you could then see how the thing evolved. And when we say evolve, that means, okay, so you have something changing,
Yes.
right? And then some changes, and then with those change, then because other things haven't changed. You see, I think the issue is because now the change, the nature of the change is a systemic change, right? So that's what you call a complex system or whatever. So everything is interconnected. There's no way. So there are some gaps. The problem is not with the gaps. We should laugh at the school because there are gaps, right? Because we don't know how to deal with the gap. Nobody knows. And even, if someone says, okay, now this is the solution, you can list everything in the school, and then this is how everything should be changing. So you press a button, everything changed. It doesn't work that way because people's mind don't change in that way.
Yes.
If you can change the program, okay, so we change the operating system right
Yes.
away. Okay, so in this case, we can say, okay, so there are these changes. So this change, in a way, pushes the teachers to do this. And because this is in the contract terms, everyone is affected, whether you're a coach or you're just an ordinary teacher or whatever. But then just forcing people to change. So, okay, I learned from your school. So I'm in school A, you're in school B. I know that you've done this, and it seems to have worked very well. And I put this into the contract of
Yes.
with my teachers. It may not work.
Yes.
Right? Because you need to have the interaction mechanisms,
Yes.
right? And so how do people deal with it? And so I think if you could actually demonstrate the co-evolution, the tension, you change something, so once you change something, the other things don't change, so there's the tension. And the tension needs to be resolved. And in the resolution process, then you have other changes, and so that's why it's co-evolving.
Okay.
Right? So one can imagine that maybe next year the school in the contract might have, some modification to the contract terms as
Yes.
well. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So to summarize, I think you're suggesting that I narrow the scope a bit and narrate through one interaction focus as it feeds back into the system. Okay. I don't need to talk about all of these other interaction foci, just one interaction focus, and it's like the ball.
You might, okay, I think you might want to think about how exactly you can, okay, what do you want? It still goes back to the message. What's the most important finding, I mean, from this particular case that you want to elaborate.
Yes.
So if it is co-evolution, which are because not everything you were able to see change over that year,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So you might want to look at which might be changing, and also sometimes the tension could be different. So it may not necessarily have to be only one thing, but I think no more than two. So you
Yes.
could say the interaction focus. I think the interaction focus in this case would be the implementation.
Yes.
The implementation of the performance appraisal
Yes.
criteria.
Okay.
Right. So you might want to look at that, and
Thank
so you need to be. So in that case, then how you lay it out and then how you finish needs to be there. And also
Yes.
say, now chain co-evolution and the changing practice. Well, changing structure and mechanism, does it necessarily mean that there is a positive advancement in the innovation implementation? Right? Now, but I think so. So you might want to bring in a bit. You don't need to talk in great detail, but if you can bring in a bit, say for example, the blogging. Okay, so you might want to go a little bit into the blogging. And if, say, for example, with the blogging, because because you were saying now the teachers have more, well, I don't think it's unaccountable. No, what do you call it? That kind of the time, the more flexible time.
Yes,
So,
discretionary time.
yeah. So the well, I'm not sure you should call it discretionary time. It's more like unassigned. So not. I mean, there's no fixed assignment
Yes.
to it. Then so where do these different changes come in? And also, as they move, do you see tensions also not just arising from certain changes, but also from the implementation themselves?
Yes.
So say, for example, you can see that with a particular implementation, maybe the software or maybe the hardware or whatever. So if you could illustrate those, and so you don't need to say that it is necessarily positive or negative, but you can see.
Right.
But you can see the development.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I feel like I can do that for my case, the actual chapters that I'm writing. I can take you through these narrations. For this manuscript, I can try it too. Going back to this most important message, just about what I actually presented today, I feel like the viability of this emergent role depends on the nature of changes and the wider changes surrounding the role. The wider changes give meaning and purpose to the role. It's like a man does not exist in a vacuum. Using let's say, the Garden of Eden metaphor, the man was placed in a kind of environment. That environment was constructed around this man.
Yeah, but you should also be highlighting what matters. Okay, it's not just a man, but it's not only that the man needs other men, but it's the man needing structures and mechanisms to support the change.
Yes.
Okay, so and it's very interesting because I mean a lot of times people talk about you know would expect the PT to be teaching their colleagues what to do, right? Or demonstrating or co-teaching.
Mm.
But in this case, the focus is on, say, performance appraisal. It's very, very unique, isn't it? In one sense. So
Yes.
so and then because of this quite pervasive, because it goes throughout the whole school.
Mm.
It's not like say, okay, I'm doing digital storytelling with the language teacher. I mean, I mean, actually, this can still happen. But then, the reason why he may be interested in talking about digital storytelling with me is because in his contract, he has this term.
Mm.
So no matter what, he has to talk to me.
Yes.
So it's that kind of a situation.
Yes.
And so if you could weave a story, so now I want to talk about writing technique.
Yes.
Okay, so how do you write? You start by you need to start by so you need to take people on a journey. And so and usually it's like, especially reading this type of paper, people are reading with the rational mind.
Yes.
Okay, so it's better to put a broader scope. So it's like peeling an onion. You go from the outer layer to the inside,
Mm.
and not just picking pieces out from the middle. So if you talk about, so you need to talk about what you're trying to. So what's your problem in an understandable
Yes.
manner, and then you need to talk about your methodology. I mean, why did you approach it? Why did you do it in a school? Why did you focus on well, you did mention it, but if you could sort of piece it in a more sort of intentional manner.
Yes.
And then also then you talk about the data collection, you know, in a more systematic manner, so people feel that you were, you know, dealing with it in a very methodical way.
Yes. Yes. I haven't mentioned the wider context of my research and how I even got started in this and how I arrived at.
You don't need to put too much.
Yes.
You know, just a couple a couple of sentences would do, but
Yes.
you need to lead people through. So just like say, if you want to take people down somewhere, you don't need to be telling them. So if you want, well, I don't say you need to do it now, but if you want to take people down, walking down to Central, you might walk through Western, where there are lots of things, and you're not going to give them a guided tour of Western District
Yes.
on the way down. But then you need to then say, okay, you have to go down through Western District, and you know, you walk along the you know, the tram line or whatever.
Yes.
So you give people a kind of a guidance through, and so they understand why you are doing this. And if you're focusing on something, you tell them that I'm focusing on this. Why am I focusing on this?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is a very good start. I mean, usually it's very difficult to. I mean, we all do that. I mean, when I'm writing, I have to change so many times as
Yes.
well. So
Good.
so
Thank you.
get something down first, and then you can attack it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Something's down.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys.
Awesome.